If you hear the phrase Napoleon complex, you instantly picture a very specific stereotype. We imagine a domineering, overly aggressive guy trying to compensate for a severe lack of vertical stature in a boardroom or a bar. The Emperor of France has been globally accepted as a comically tiny man for 2 centuries, but the historical record tells a completely different story. Napoleon Bonaparte was actually of average and arguably slightly above average height. This chart shows the exact measurements. Napoleon stood roughly 5 feet 6.5 inches tall. The average French male in the early 1800s measured closer to 5 feet 4 inches. If the empirical data proves he was taller than his own citizens, we have to ask how a 200-year-old lie successfully shrank an emperor's legacy. A simple mathematical error and a few optical illusions were deliberately weaponized to rewrite history. The origin of the official medical record begins in 1821, during Napoleon's final days in exile on the remote island of St. Helena. After he passed away, his French personal physician conducted an autopsy. The physician carefully measured the fallen emperor and recorded the dimensions in his notes, officially listing his height as exactly 5 feet 2 inches. This diagram shows the root of the confusion. Europe in the early 19th century lacked a standardized measurement system. The French pouce, or inch, was 2.71 centimeters. The British inch was significantly shorter, sitting at 2.54 centimeters. When we run the conversion on that autopsy report, 5 feet 2 inches on the French scale translates perfectly to 5 feet 6.5 inches on the modern British imperial scale. The British doctors present at the autopsy, and the international press that covered it, failed to specify which measurement system was used. They printed the number 5'2" as an absolute medical fact, providing seemingly indisputable proof that he was a tiny man. But the raw materials for this smear campaign existed well before his death. We can trace the cultural origins back to the Italian campaigns of 1796 and his famous nickname, Le Petit Caporal. In the context of 18th century French military slang, petit was an affectionate term for a young, hands-on commander who aimed his own artillery. It was a badge of camaraderie from his troops, totally unrelated to his physical size. Those linguistic misunderstandings were compounded by a terrible optical illusion on the battlefield, courtesy of Napoleon's elite personal security detail. The Imperial Guard had incredibly strict physical requirements. A soldier had to be at least 5'10" to join the Grenadiers. On top of that, they wore massive, towering bearskin hats. Napoleon, a man of average height, in a standard bicorn hat, walked squarely in the middle of these absolute giants. An affectionate soldier's nickname, combined with the looming visual contrast of his bodyguards, handed his enemies the exact psychological ammunition they needed. By 1803, the British public was terrified. The Treaty of Amiens had collapsed, and a French invasion across the English Channel felt imminent. To neutralize that public panic, the British press needed to shrink the geopolitical threat. Enter James Gillray, a brilliant and vicious political caricaturist in London. Gillray created the character of Little Boney. He stripped the terrifying conqueror of all dignity, drawing him as a miniature, absurd toddler, prone to extreme temper tantrums. These mass-produced prints deliberately ignored the towering general of the French propaganda machine. Instead, they showed a diminutive, greedy child, frantically trying to carve off pieces of the globe. The British public laughed. The psychological warfare worked flawlessly, neutralizing the paralyzing fear of the French armies by reducing their leader to a literal punchline. Modern historians have entirely discarded the Little Boney myth, confirming his height was absolutely standard for his era. To put it in perspective, Napoleon was noticeably taller than his own contemporaries, including the 4th U.S. President, James Madison, and the legendary British Admiral Horatio Nelson. Yet the damage stuck. Today, psychologists still use the term Napoleon complex to describe short men overcompensating for their height, an entire behavioral theory anchored to a historical falsehood. Napoleon himself knew exactly what had defeated him. During his final exile, he admitted that James Gillray's cartoons inflicted more damage on his empire than a dozen British generals ever could. We often say history is written by the victors. In this case, it was drawn by cartoonists. A failure to convert a medical measurement, spun by deliberate media manipulation, permanently overwrote reality with a joke.